We're going to be sewing the body together with blanket stitch, which is a kind of binding stitch. It's almost like overlocking on a sewing machine, so it sews a seam and at the same time it binds your edges in. So it gives a really neat finish, and it's really pretty to look at as well. But the stitch that we're going to be using on the final project is going to be very small, and it's going to match the felt, so it's difficult for me to show you the technique of blanket stitch on the final thing. So what I'm going to do is just use a couple of little scraps and some contrasting felt to show, contrasting thread rather, to show you the technique before I start making the actual mouse. So we're going to be using 2 strands of thread, and rather than cutting 2 separate strands, what I like to do is cut the thread to twice the length you want to work with. So I use about 1 meter or 40 inches, and then I separate one strand out of that, like I showed you with the previous step, and then you fold it in half, put the 2 ends of the thread together, put them through your needle. I'm just going to thread that out of shot because I can't see what I'm doing properly otherwise. And then you have this loop at the end of the thread, and that's what you use to start off your stitching without a knot. Also, blanket stitch is commonly, whenever I've had workshops that involve blanket stitch, people have struggled to start off, but with this knotless loop start, that kind of rids you of that problem. So to start blanket stitch, I work my blanket stitch from right to left. You can do it whichever way you like, whichever way you find more comfortable, but this is the way that I do it. So you start by putting your needle in from the front of the fabric to the back. You've lined up your 2 pieces of fabric, and I do it about 2 millimeters, or 1/16 of an inch from the edge. You want it to be far enough in that the felt's not going to disintegrate inside your needle, but you don't want it to be so far in that your seams are really thick and obvious. So you pull the thread almost all the way through to leave you with a loop, and then you put the needle through the loop and pull it so that your thread is stoppered kind of halfway between the 2 layers along that outside seam. And then your next stitch, you make a roughly 2 millimeters next to the previous one, all the way through. And this time, instead of going through the loop, you come through this loop here just before you tighten the stitch. From back to front you enter the loop, and then you pull it tight. And again, from front to back, needle through, pull the thread, go through the loop from the back to the front, and pull it tight. Again, needle from front to back, pull the thread almost all the way through, go through the loop from the back to the front, and pull it tight. And as you'll see, you're getting a line, a seam that joins those 2 pieces of felt from along the middle, so you don't get any loose bits of felt, and then you've got these pretty little stitches that make up your seam that are joining the actual fabric. So I'll just carry on with this. You can go around curves, you just adjust the length of your stitches. So let me get a bit further and I'll show you. So the stitches will become closer together here, and then they'll kind of go out at an angle. So they'll start to spread out around the curve. So front to back, pull almost all the way through, Put your needle through the thread loop from back to front and pull. These threads are quite long, so once it's folded in half, it's roughly as long as your arm. That's so that you don't have to pull countless reams of thread through each time you make a stitch, but you also equally don't want to be working with really short threads, because then you'll just end up having to change them all the time. So I'm just going to show you how to finish off a thread and start a new one. So let's just pretend that this thread is near the end of its life. What you would do if this was your last stitch, you would turn your fabric over to the back of the stitch and put your needle back through the point you just came out, and then go round again and do exactly the same again, needle through the back, so that it sits on top of that old stitch. And then you can do that either 2 or 3 times. I'm just going to do it 2 times for this video. And then what I'm going to do is put my needle inside the seam of that last stitch and just run it underneath a few stitches. If you can see, it's going through the middle of these stitches here. Pull it all the way through. And then snip off the excess where it comes out. And then to start a new thread, so I'm going to start it with a knotless loop again, just like I did the first time. You put the you basically start off exactly as you did at the beginning, but you're going to start over the top of the last stitch you made. So you front to back, leave the loop there, put the needle through the loop, pull it tight, and then carry on as usual. What this will mean is that you don't have to worry about making any knots or anything. It will leave you with a thicker stitch here, obviously. You can see that in this example, but obviously I am using contrasting thread. You will be using matching thread. So if you were looking for it, you would be able to see that join. But if you are, if you don't, it will be very discreet and you won't really notice it in your final mouse when you're using the matching thread. So if I just show you this close up, so you've got the little stitches to make your join, and then you've got a binding line that goes all around the edge of the felt to keep holding the edges, and that's blanket stitch. Right, we're now ready to begin constructing the body, so you need to collect all of the stuff you've prepared for the body. You've got the 2 front body pieces and the back body piece, the tail, the hanging loop, your pipe cleaner inserts for the limbs, and then you need, oh, I've left out the ears as well, and then you need your matching threads. So for this one I'm showing you the cream character. There are going to be, the construction for this body is the same no matter which character you're doing. So I'm working with cream, but you choose whichever thread goes with the felt that you're working with for the body. You also need your applique pins, or any pins that you've got, and if you're using them as well, grab a handful of wonder clips, your hemostat, and your stuffing. So to begin with, we're going to do this all, oh, and your embroidery scissors, I forgot that bit. We're going to do this all using the blanket stitch technique that we just showed you. So let me just find my needle, which I've now hidden somewhere. I'll grab another one out of here. The first thing to do is to make a hole where this tail marker is. So pop your needle in, just the same as we made the hole for the tail to go in the scrap piece of felt. Wiggle it around to make the hole bigger. Then get your scissors, wiggle it a bit more, and then you can put your tail through. Obviously it doesn't matter which side of the felt you put things through. I'm going to have the marker on the inside, and then just shove that tail through like that, so it's held fast against the hole and sticking out of the back. You can bend it wherever you need to keep it out of the way while you're stitching. So I'm just going to bend it downwards because we're going to be starting to stitch around the top of the body. Then the next thing to do is to join these two front body pieces, and you're going to line them up right sides out. So all of the stitching for this body is going to be done, you're going to be able to see the seams on the outside of the body. So you're going to have right sides out for every piece of stitching you do. I'm going to use my wonder clips just to hold this body together in a couple of places, but you can use your pins. It's any way to just hold it together. Make sure you've got it lined up properly. And then we're going to use blanket stitch and the knotless loop just to join these two body pieces. So I'm going to separate out one strand of the cream thread, or whichever thread you're using to match your felt. Pop the two ends through the end of my needle. And then begin to stitch. We are going to join this central seam from the base to the point of the nose. So you're going to go in roughly 2 millimeters or 1/16 of an inch from the edge, pull it almost all of the way through, go through the loop and pull it tight. And you're going to do that all the way up that seam. Just make sure your loop doesn't get caught around any of the limbs and things. You just need to pick it out. And also, just here, sometimes you'll notice that the loop will twist. Just make sure it's untwisted before you put your needle through it. So you should always have an open bit here before you put your thread through it. So I'm just going to continue using blanket stitch to go all the way up to the nose, and then I'll come back and show you what to do next. Right, you'll see I have joined this whole seam with blanket stitch, and then I have ended the thread just here at the nose. So I've done those couple of stitches on top of each other and then threaded the excess thread through this seam at the base of the mouth. What we're going to do next is we're going to open this out, and you'll notice he now has the same shape as the back. So what you need to do is line these two up together, and then just match the limbs, and you can whack in a couple of pins or use your wonder clips. I'm just going to use the wonder clips for this bit because they are quicker. Pins will do exactly the same job though. And you don't need to worry about joining the bottom bit yet because we are only going to be concentrating on the top. So once you've joined the base, you're going to need to match. When I say match the curves in the instructions, you've got a curve here and a curve on either side of the head. What you need to do is join this curve around there. So it's going to go over the top, and you're going to sew along this seam here to join the two pieces. The best way to match it is to put a little pin here at the base of the neck. Oh, just a quick note on pinning. The best way to pin for things like this is not to put it in at kind of in a straight line and then bend it and put it up like that, because you'll get a big hill. If you slide them in almost on the flat and just catch a little of the thread underneath, you'll get a much smoother join. So that's how I pin things anyway. So I'm going to pin at the base of the neck on each side. Make sure you've got the arms lined up where they need to be. So you're basically putting a pin where the front starts to differ from the back shape. And then I'm going to put a pin. The way I'm going to do it is I'm going to stitch down the right hand side of the body first. You can go around the left if you like. It doesn't matter which way you go, but I'm going to start with the right, so you only need to pin the right hand side for the time being. So I'm going to line up the two nose parts and then pop a pin in there as well. This is where applique pins come in handy because they're so short, and it makes it easier than if you've got really long pins that are kind of sticking all over the place. Long pins will work perfectly fine, they're just a little bit more unwieldy, so if you have applique pins they're great. And then I just start kind of go to the middle of the head and the middle of this and pin those two bits together. Pinning doesn't have to be perfect. And then for good measure you can pop in a couple more pins in the centre of each of those remaining curves. Hopefully you can see this. It's difficult to tell when I'm not sat behind the camera. Okay, so that is matching curves. It doesn't look terribly neat at the moment, but then I've got a new thread. Again, we're going to use the knotless loop, and I'm going to, because I like to go from right to left with my blanket stitch, I'm going to stitch from the top of the head rather than going around the side there. And what I'm going to do is just pop my needle right in the tip of the nose. Let me check you can see this. So about 2 millimeters all the way around at the tip of the nose, and in the same place here, just where you finished that last one. Whoops. Let me watch what I'm doing instead of watching the camera. Get this in the right place. So the tip of the nose part there, into the middle of the nose part there. Pull it all the way through, or almost all the way through the loop, and then carry on blanket stitching around this curve. You just need to, there's lots of things for your thread to tangle around at this part, so you just need to watch that you've got things in the right place, and then you can take your pins out as you work your way around the curve. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to carry on stitching all around this curve, and then I'm going to make my way up to this, up around the back of this arm, and then I'm going to go just slightly past the tip of this arm, and that's when we will stop and put the pipe cleaner in. So I'm just going to carry on and do that, and I'll come back when I get to here. Right, so I've sewn all the way around this back seam, around the back of the arm, and just past the tip of the where the hand would be. I have done a couple of extra stitches in the end here just to stop anything poking out of the end, and I have then stopped, but my needle is still attached. This is where we are going to take one of these little limb pipe cleaners and pop it in to the arm. So you can take off your pins or wonder clips just to get them out of the way, and you can also remove this one because we won't match this remaining curve until the end. So you're going to open it up, turn it around to the front, and take the skinny part facing that way and just push the skinny part into this end here. This is why you need to take extra care that your stitches are fine enough, so make sure they're not extending too far into the middle around these arms, because then you won't be able to squish this bit in. With the arm parts, you should fold them upwards around the neck so that they enter into the head here. So they'll both fold upwards. With the legs, they just stick straight up into the body. Once you have popped that pipe cleaner in, you can reattach the body. Actually, I'm going to use a pin, I think, because they get in the way slightly less, because this is going to be in place for a bit longer. And I'm now going to continue blanket stitching. I'm going to go all the way around the rest of this arm, stitching the pipe cleaner in there, around the hip, and go to the base of the leg, go slightly round the bottom of the foot, and pop in the next pipe cleaner, then stitch, then I'll probably move this tail out of the way here. I'll stitch all the way up round here, round to the bottom of the foot, and put in this pipe cleaner, and then come all the way up to here, just to where the hip is, and then I will stop again. So I will carry on and do all of that and then come back to you for the next part of the video. Just a couple of notes. You can use, if you've got wonder clips, or if you want to pin them, when you're doing the legs and things, bits can get in the way, so don't be afraid to fold. Well, fold the tail up, but you can also fold, so while you're stitching this leg, you might want to fold that leg up there and just hold it out of the way with one of your clips, just to keep things out of the way while you are stitching, so that your thread is less likely to get tangled up. And once you're kind of doing around the tops, you can do exactly the same. Just use things to pin them out of the way. There's also ways you can hold the mouse to stop your thread getting tangled up, so you can kind of make sure all of the bits you're not working on are included in are held in your hand here, and then the thread can't get wrapped around them. So yeah, anyway, I'm going to continue around the body all the way around here, pipe cleaner in this leg, continue stitching, pipe cleaner in this leg, and then stop when I come to the waist. I'll come back to you then. Once you get to the back of this, or halfway up kind of this hip waist part, stop stitching. Again, I've still got the needle attached, and you're going to stuff the legs now before you continue up here, just because it's easier to reach them while you're while this part is still open. So the first thing I'm going to do is just clip this head and arm part out of the way. As before, you can use a needle for this, or you can just hold them. I find it easier to make sure they're all clipped out of the way. And I'm going to just pop this one against here with a pin, just to hold this part open. A couple of things to make sure of. Make sure your tail part is flat against the back there. I don't know if you can see inside very easily. And when you're stuffing, you also need to make sure that you don't either push these bits too far in or pull them out as you're stuffing. So you kind of need to stuff around the pipe cleaners and around in front of this tail part. Let me just twist that a little bit more to make sure it's flat. Okay, so to stuff it, you are going to use your hemostat. I take very small pieces at one time, and then I hold them closed inside the hemostat and then push them down inside the limbs. Because you've got to keep them closed until they are where you want them to go, and then kind of hold the stuffing inside the body with your thumb and forefinger while you gently undo this and leave the stuffing inside there. You won't get right down to the very bottom of this, that's where that skinny pipe cleaner is, but you can get a little way into the curve, and the curved end of this hemostat will help you to stuff around the curves of the limbs. Again, just watching out for the pipe cleaners, you don't want to pull them out. Okay, so I'm just going to carry on and stuff all of that part. You want to stuff it quite hard, so I would probably keep going. You think that you don't have enough in there, but you think that you've got as much as you can do, but you can always stuff more. So I like to stuff mine really quite full. And then once you've got about up to the belly part, you can unclip this and unpin this, match the arms, continue to stitch, sew up this bit, sew around to there, insert the last pipe cleaner, which will bend up around the neck, and then you stop stitching once you get to the base of the neck and finish off your thread. And then I'll come back once I get to that point. Once you get to this point, so you've popped the pipe cleaner in there and sewn all the way up to the neck and fastened off the thread, you need to put the hanging loop in. So what I've done is I've taken the hanging loop I prepared earlier, put the unknotted end through my needle, and I'm going to put it into the head from the inside to the outside. You want it to come out in the middle here, roughly in line with those ear markers. It doesn't have to be exact, but so I'm going to bring it up here, pull it all the way so that the knot holds inside the body, and then put the needle back in a little way away. And pull the loop back through. Oh, I've got it caught around the tail there. And I normally have my loop at about 10 centimetres long, between 9 and 10 centimetres, which is 4 inches or so, 3.5 to 4 inches. It's roughly your 4 fingers kind of spaced out a bit. You just want it big enough to hang around a doorknob or hang around any kind of object if you're going to want to hang it somewhere other than a Christmas tree. To tie it off or to secure it, you take off the needle, pull this knot out a little way, and you're just going to knot it inside. Don't worry too much about the length. You're best to knot it a bit too long to begin with, and then gauge how much more you want to take off. You can always take off more length, but you can't add it back on very easily. So just any kind of knot that you want to use. Let's just pull that up and see how long it is. So we probably want to take another centimetre or half an inch off that probably. So I'm just going to tie another knot a little bit further up from the last one. You can use a tape measure if you want to, and I'm happy with that. That's about the length I want it. So cut off the excess inside the head, and that's your hanging loop. So now you're going to use your hemostat to, through this hole, stuff the arms. So you're going to stuff inside there and stuff inside there. Be careful not to pull these pipe cleaners for the arms out. You want them to sit inside the head, going up the back of the head, a bit like a spine. Don't let them curve around and come in front of the nose, because they might get in the way of your putting your eyes and stitching your face in. So if they're a bit long, you can push them down a bit further inside, just so as I say, they come up a bit like a spine at the back of the head, so that just means that you can, the neck is a bit positionable as well, you can kind of, within reason. So fill the arms through the hole, then you're going to attach a new cream thread, and starting at the nose and working your way back, you'll stitch up to roughly the ear marker, then stuff the face and use a lot of stuffing here. You want to stuff the whole face and neck with more stuffing than you think it will be able to take. It can take more than you think. And then once it's all stuffed, you will just close this last seam, and I overlap a few of these stitches here and then fasten off the thread. So I'm just going to do all of that. I'll come back to you when I'm closing up this seam. You need to match these curves like you did at the start. So yeah, I'll come back to you when I'm closing this seam just to show you that last final bit, and I'll be back in a second. Right, so I've stuffed the chest and the arms, then started sewing back up this seam. Then I've stuffed the head and stuffed right back into the body. So all I've got to do now is close up this seam. Now when I said really stuff it with a lot of stuffing, this is what I mean. You want it to be kind of bursting at the seams before you sew it up. So I'm just going to push that stuffing in a little bit further. And then I'm going to continue to sew up this seam. So you kind of, you do it almost though it's flat, rather than holding it like we did when it wasn't stuffed. You put your needle through. The technique is the same, it's just that you're sewing up a much tighter seam, and you can even go through some of the stuffing. When you pull it tight, it will look exactly like all the other seams. So I'm just going to close up this gap. And I'm getting back to the start of the join now. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take a few stitches past that and overlap the beginning and the end of the seam, just for a little bit of extra strength. So you're just stitching on top of the stitches that are already there now. And I'd maybe do that for 3 stitches. So last one. It just means that you're not finishing all your securing stitches. They don't all end up being on top of each other. Otherwise, rather than having 3 stitches on top of each other, you end up with 6, and it really does look very bulky. So it's partly for security and partly for neatness. So I'm just going to finish that by pushing that needle through the seam. I'm going to, any bit where the needle is quite difficult to pull through, I just use the hemostat to pull it through. It makes it a lot easier, and it saves your hands. Snip off the excess, and that's your basic mouse. So now we just need to add the ears, and then the body sewing part is done. So to do the ears, if you'll remember, I left the paper on. We're going to layer them up, so the peach parts go on top of the cream parts. So we've got right cream and right peach, and left cream and left peach. So if you take the papers off, and then put the peach part on top of the cream part, and then for each pair of pieces of felt, you're going to sew with the same thread colour that you used for the body. So in this case we're using cream, but whichever colour you've sewn the rest of the body in, you're going to sew all the way around the edge, joining the 2 pieces of felt with blanket stitch, just like we did for the body, and then I will come back to you just after I've done that. Right, I have sewn the 2 layers of the ear together with blanket stitch all around the edge. I haven't sewn around the base. This is the left ear we're going to do. The next thing you need to do is to fold the ear in half, and then we're just going to whip stitch it closed along the bottom hem. Whip stitch is just going from one side to the other over the top of the seam. Just to hold it together. And once you've got a few of those stitches in, then we're going to attach it to the head. How I do this is I get a little pin. Let me just put this other ear out of the way, and I pop the pin in between the fold of the ear, just in the middle, and poke it out of the bottom a little bit. And then I'm just going to use that to temporarily hold the ear in place on the head. So you've got the ear markers here, and you want to go roughly where those are, kind of around the middle area. Just position it and then check the front to make sure you're happy with how it looks. And then I'm going to push that pin in a bit further just to hold the ear there. And we are going to whip stitch the ear to the head. I'm just going to fold these arms down so they're out of my way and hold them under my hands. So to do this, you leave the thread attached, put your needle through the seam. Let me just check that you can, no, you can't move my hand. Right, so you put the needle through the seam of the head, in one side and out the other. Don't pull anything tight yet while the pin is still in there, and put your needle then back through the other side of the ear. It's a bit fragile for your first few stitches. And you want to come out a little way along. Again, don't pull anything tight just yet. Get a few stitches in first. Go back through the seam of the head, out the other side, and through the ear. And now we've got a couple of those in, you can pull it a bit tighter and remove the pin. And then you just go along like that, whip stitching. So I'm just going to make a few more stitches just to secure it, just back and forth along this ear part, and then I'll come back and just show you how to finish off the thread. Once you're happy that your ear is securely attached to the head, you just need to finish off the thread. So the way we're going to do it is, normally you'd make a couple of back stitches, but there's not really anywhere to go. So take the needle, push it back in through near where you've just come, and then come out somewhere that you've got an existing stitch from the seam of the body. So I've just got a hole there already that was there from before. Pull the thread through, and then you're going to go back in that exact hole, and then just push your needle through so it comes out in a random spot on the body. Pull the thread and snip off the excess. Then repeat that for your other ear, and that's the body done.